Thank you. Lovely to see you. Congratulations, first of all, and our congratulations to President-elect Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. We've spoken quite a few times about this election. In your opinion, what makes it so historic?
I think there's several reasons. First of all, that we did have a very high turnout for the United States, over 50%, because many people don't vote often. Secondly, I think that President-elect Biden put together a broad coalition that stood on the shoulders of African-American women. As you look at the results of the turnout of voters, you can see that the strongest support for this team came from African-American women who understand the importance of returning the United States to normalcy and to support a government that looks like America. So I think those two things made this a remarkable election and outcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What's expected from a Biden-Harris administration?
Well, I believe we can look at President-elect Biden's long record. I mean, many times were mentioned during the campaign that he has many decades of public service in Washington. Of course, as a senator who was very focused on, very knowledgeable about, very, very active with regard to foreign policy issues. And certainly as vice president in the Obama administration, a great focus on foreign policy. So I think we are going to see a return to the United States being a dependable partner for our friends and allies around the country, and that we have something to look back on as to the things that he's going to have as priorities.
Do you think we're going to see more of a conventional style of presidency?
I believe that is exactly so. And I think that's important. It doesn't mean that we're going back to exactly what we saw in the past. It doesn't mean that we're going to be stifled in our thinking. And indeed, as you've seen from the vice president's campaign statements, he is looking to change the composition of the American government to ensure that his administration looks and reflects the full nature of the American people. But indeed, a United States that is dependable, that is clear in its priorities and how it looks and deals with the rest of the world, I think we can count on that.
It's reported that Joe Biden is ahead by about 5 million votes. What's your opinion about Donald Trump's claims, especially on social media?
Well, I think many people over the last 4 years have learned to take many of the president's comments via social media with patience and move on. Many things have been said via social media that we all would have been better off if they had not been said. The reality is that President-elect Biden is indeed president-elect and is well ahead. There has been a steady stream of lawyers, of politicians, both Democratic and Republican. For instance, the Arizona Secretary General announced that he believes Vice President Biden will indeed win Arizona and that there is no support for voter fraud. And if you look at all of the lawsuits that the president has tried to bring, the president and his allies, very few of them are moving forward. And even those that might have some merit, they are addressing a very small number of votes that are absolutely unlikely to overturn the results of this election.
Is there any chance that Donald Trump's claims may be correct?
No.
That's a very short and very sure answer from you. Right, and obviously most of the media now are agreeing that this is the way forward, really.
Indeed. I mean, you had Fox News call it, and that is, the right side of where people get their information, the media that they trust. So many times during the last 4 years, and certainly as these election results were being called, if you had any, concerns or doubts about uh, the general media and their reporting, if you go to Fox, and if Fox is calling it, then it's being called because they are supporters. They've been strong supporters of the president's for the last 4 years. If there was any way for them to say that the president is going to be able to change the results, they would be saying it. Fox has called it, and so, no.
Donald Trump has fired the Secretary of Defense and some other key people in the Pentagon. What impact does this have on the American people and globally?
Yes, well, certainly the American people, and I imagine the rest of the world, are watching this with some concern. It is a troubling time to be making changes when we are in what is always a challenging time when you're transitioning from one administration to the other. Any nation would want to communicate steadiness, calmness, and smooth transition. President Trump has shown for the last 4 years of his administration that calm, steady is of little interest to him, if at all. So none of us can be surprised at these last minute moves, but the reality is, I believe we have about 70 days before we have a new administration. Certainly what can be done with regard to the US military is going to be a very long-term effort. It's not something that spins on a dime. So I don't believe there are going to be any major changes, except that it makes people feel a bit unsettled to see these things happening at the last moment.
Sure. There's a growing amount of coronavirus deaths, and the figures keep rising, the infection figures keep rising. No acknowledgement from the White House. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we've seen throughout the time in the United States, as we have been grappling with the coronavirus, many questions about how the federal response led by the president and the vice president, how effective that response has been, how steady, how dependent upon the science that should help us all address this. So this is nothing new, that we're not getting the leadership, the direction that many of us would hope for from the President of the United States. That said, we are the United States, and each governor has had to take a leadership position, and because every state is very, very different from other parts of the United States. We are a large nation. So when you think about what's appropriate for the state of New York or the state of Connecticut or the state of Florida versus the state of Ohio or indeed the state of Hawaii, where I am right now, I mean, what's going on outside my window here is very different than what's going on outside the state of Ohio. So state leadership is grappling with this issue as it has always been in cooperation with the federal government. But I believe we can look for a very decided, clear difference in leadership once President-elect Biden takes office.
Do you see any difficulties in the transition of power?
It's President-elect Biden described it as an embarrassment. We unfortunately have had too many of those in the last 4 years. So again, we're a strong nation. We will survive this. The transition is already done. You have seen the public announcement of the transition teams that are standing ready to work with agencies. The reality is that President-elect Biden has many years of service, public service, also in the White House. The Democrats have only been out of office for 4 years, so the connectivity is strong there. And people who the vice president is bringing into his administration know what to do. They come with solid experience. And that combination of people who have government, federal government experience, along with the younger people, the newer people, the broader people that he's bringing in, that is going to be that sweet spot, that combination of experience and innovative thinking. So although there's a hiccup right now, the reality is that the transition will be fine because we're not starting with new people. Indeed, as President Trump did, if you'll recall, he wasn't prepared for the transition. Many of the people that he brought in government came because they were friends of his or were billionaires, but did not come with solid experience to really get off on the right foot from the beginning. And that's a very different circumstance that we find ourselves in now.
What will Joe Biden's priorities be as a president?
Well, I have to leave that for President-elect to announce. I think we can all judge on his past and on his statements throughout the campaign and since the end of the election. One, of course, is to steady our nation, to get adult leadership in place that's looking at science, that is taking counsel from the experts and knows his own mind, but is willing to listen, to learn, to lead, quite frankly. So I think that's number one. We have to steady the ship. The second thing, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is that he's got solid experience with regard to foreign policy. So I think we're going to be looking at those issues that were either set aside or ignored by the previous administration. Certainly climate change is a huge one. There's been an acknowledgement of that urgency from the very beginning. COVID is obviously already on his radar. We have got to get that in hand in the nation and cooperate with the rest of the world as we move forward toward a vaccine, toward putting in place protocols that allow us to master this challenge that's facing the entire world and to navigate our lives and rebuild our economies and get on with improving the state of the world.
In your opinion, what is the most optimistic scenario that we would expect and the worst case scenario about the transition of power?
Well, I would say the worst case scenario is that we continue with this unfortunate recalcitrance from the president to accept reality, to rise to the occasion, to be presidential and work for the good of the entire nation, which means a smooth, seamless transition. The worst case scenario is that he's incapable of doing that, and it continues on until December 14th when the Electoral College votes and the transition happens. Because again, one person, even the President of the United States, cannot stop that. We do have processes in place. The vote will take place, the transition will come. So there is that delay. I think that's less harmful than it might otherwise be because we have elected a leader who has an enormous amount of respect and an enormous amount of support from those who are experienced and can really hit the ground running when they come into office. So I think the worst case scenario is bad, but certainly not a disaster. The best case scenario, of course, is that the president, before he goes to bed tonight, accepts reality and the transition can move freely and the American people can move on. The American people and the rest of the world can move on and get ready for the challenges that are going to face the next administration.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You made many friends when you were here in Malta. Many people love to see you with us. Would you, just to round off for today, pass a message on to the Maltese people?
Absolutely. My heart is in Malta. I think everyone knows that. It was the most magical time for me personally, and of course, a time when we had an amazing bilateral relationship and great cooperation on many, many issues with the government and the people of Malta. I expect that to continue in future, and certainly when we are able to master this terrible pandemic that has taken so many innocent lives, I will be back to Malta to visit with friends and to see your beautiful, beautiful country again.
We very much look forward to that. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Proset lilek ukoll. Thank you. That was Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley, former US Ambassador